Hi and welcome to episode 6 of the Hive Bus with me, your host, Velemina Simono. It is Heritage Month and I'd like to say Happy Heritage Day to you, whoever you are and wherever you are. As anticipated, we are definitely going to be talking all things tradition, culture and heritage. And this time around, I am joined by a lovely lady by the name of Thando Welly. And thank you so much for creating time to come here and have the conversation with us. Obviously, before we just dive into the its and whats, just a quick introduction. Who is Thando? And yeah.
Thando, she's her. So she's the girl.
Yeah.
Soweto born and raised. I'm interested in all things development.
Yeah.
And as such, I thought, you know what, corporate's cool, but can I go into business?
Yeah.
Nobody warns you how hard business is.
Never do. Ever.
So you can say I'm the girl peddling that space and trying so hard to make it
Yeah.
work, and to some extent it is, you know. I thought to myself, if I can do something that helps the generation that's coming behind us not struggle through the things we've struggled through, popular saying that I like, we become that others may become.
Yeah.
I'm pro that.
Listen.
If you struggled through something and you figured it out, don't be
Don't let the
content
others
to,
struggle.
yeah, so
That is
that's sort of where I am mentally, and just my entire being
Yeah.
is there.
All right. Now just to hop into the chat, culture, tradition, heritage. I mean, at the very core of it all, these things have to do with, a way of living, from the food, the language, the ins and outs. So I just want to know, what do you think tradition or culture or heritage is in this day and age?
So to prepare for this, I consulted Google.
Yeah.
And I literally had to go find out what does tradition actually mean.
Yeah.
And the one definition I found is that it's the adherence to ideas and customs that your ancestors shared, and it's an absorption of your ancestors' experiences and then passing that on to your offspring. That's immediately dangerous, because if in between absorption and transmission no growth or no progress happens, then did we just copy and paste?
Yeah.
Was there room for modernization? And I know the question you sent me was around culture and tradition versus cosmopolitanism, and those are two conflicting ideas, because cosmopolitanism says free thinking, one global world, we're all global citizen, this is all based on shared ideas and behaviors. But then traditionalism says, no, this is how your people did it.
Thought throughout. And that is very scary. And now, and cosmopolitanism is basically where the world is right now. Free thinking, different thinking. And now we go back to the definition that you unpacked for us, tradition, no matter how scary it is. Do you think it still has room in a cosmopolitan world?
Room is one thing, relevance is something else.
Yeah.
And so how I prepared myself for this talk was that, is tradition and culture still relevant today?
Yeah.
Very relevant, because as long as someone believes in it, as long as someone still honors it and respects it, because what would we be without amasiko? You know what I mean? We can be as modern as we like, but then everyone is practicing amasiko wabo through the frame of reference of their modernism. You know what I mean? You're not one or the other. And I know we'd like to think of it that way, that it's either you're modern or you're traditional. There's no such thing. No one out here is willing to sort of take a step back from their cultures and customs, especially if they've served you. You know what I mean? I know culture and tradition hasn't served everyone, but for the few that it has served, why would we reinvent the wheel? Why would we cast aside the one thing that's always worked for you, that abokoko and abomkhulu bako have sort of said, this is it, How do we absorb? I want to go back to the beginning when I talk about absorbing past experiences through lessons and stories and whatever else that our parents passed down. You know what I mean? Because I'm going to jump the gun a bit. We all want to be free thinkers, but I don't think anyone wants to sort of color outside the line too much, because then where do I belong? If I'm saying I'm not black, it's not white, there's no gray. But then I find a lot of us are moving into the gray And that's where I think today's talk comes from, to say, is culture and tradition then, if we're all moving into grayish area, is it still relevant then? Or does it now have to have a new name altogether?
And you know, when you're talking about how it was black, it was white, and everyone is now trying to be in the middle, which is gray, it now brings the important talk of self-actualization. Because here is a cosmopolitan world that says, think freely.
Yeah.
And through my free thinking, I said I'm going to move into the gray area. So are we saying a cosmopolitan world enables you know, people to be in the gray area? Does cosmopolitan enable people to start their own culture? And
I definitely think it does, because you know, when you're self-aware, you have a deep knowledge of self. Versus how it was back then. I mean, think about it. Our parents and grandparents only knew what they know. Tina, today we ask a lot of questions. We want to unpack, we want to be sure, we want to understand, because there's a level of consciousness that exists now that I'm not just blindly following. And I mean no disrespect to our ancestors that they were blindly following, but to some extent they were happy to accept it for what it was. But then for some reason it's just not working for us in that exact same way. We can't not question. It's just like, yes, I understand it's coffee, but what about a pumpkin chai latte? You know what I mean? It's a hot beverage bar. You know what I mean? So that's where we are right now. That there's culture and tradition, yes, but then there's the other stuff that we're trying to get into. There's self-awareness. I know this works for me. That doesn't work for me, and a lot of time that breeds a lot of cultural independence. But are we safe to practice cultural independence?
because I think a bulk of it, and this is just to step away from, you know, the questions, because a bulk of it then stems from, I'm a self-actualized person, but I feel like I'm not going to go to the mountains for circumcision when I can go to the doctor. You know what I mean? And that thin line is always bridged between who is looking over us. And I know this is dangerous territory. Who's looking over us? Is it God? Is it the ancestors? Is it both? And I think that's where the dichotomy almost steps in, right, to say if you're a free thinker, or in the modern day and age, you are saying if that the universe seeks balance, where else the tradition will always go back and say it's your ancestors. You know what I mean? And which now brings me to this question, because we are now in a digital world, where social media, and I want to believe a lot of these things almost stem from social media. Can we say social media then plays a role in introducing new traditions or new cultures or customs that people are going to follow? And I'm going to give an example how, for example, aesthetics has recently been debated as a possible cross-cultural concept. You know what I mean? Minimalism, where people are like, less is more, I'm going to have one chair in my house, I'm going to, you know what I mean? Manifesting versus praying. So could we say social media plays a role in introducing a new norm of tradition, culture, and so on?
I'm going to be controversial to say social media shows us what we want to see.
Yeah.
I really, really am of the mindset that social media forms social networks. Yeah. For me, when I hear the word social network, I immediately think a social grouping, a social bubble, people who are involved in persistent congregation. You know what I mean? Someone said once, and I found this so profound, she said, we look the same because we speak the same. Yeah. Everything we do is sort of informed by a frame of reference that comes from where we come from. You know what I mean? My understanding and my perception of the world is going to differ from yours because I'm not from where you're from. Yeah. I didn't have the same start. In fact, I don't even have the same community as you do, the people you grew up looking at and admiring and thinking, you know what, when I grow up, that's what adulthood is. I was laughing to myself this morning and thinking, I feel so bad for our generation. Yeah. I'm 35, no child, no husband. At 16, I didn't have a 35-year-old lady to look up to who was unmarried with no children. Yeah. So now do you understand that immediately, based on social norms and cultural expectations, I'm supposed to feel funny about that. but it's normal.
Yeah.
But because as a people there was no one there to model that for us, we feel iffy about it.
Yeah.
Now what social media does is that it's made certain things okay. It's okay to raise a child on your own.
Yeah.
It's okay to adopt. It's okay to be a blended family. It's okay to be whatever, because we're now conscious of the fact that nothing's cut in stone, nothing's either black or white. And if we're going to box ourselves into those social norms and cultural expectations, I think we're making life very difficult for ourselves, you know.
Yeah.
Because in as much as we can talk about cultural independence, are we the type of people that have made room for free thinking and for people who want to color outside of the lines and think outside the box? Or is that now a shock to us that, hey, don't normalize that because we're not used to it? You know what I mean? Even today, I think a lot of relatives want to ask, like, umtala, why ungakashadi vibe? But then they understand, let me bite my tongue because, you know what I mean? But back in the day, that was okay to ask. Now, not so much. You know what I mean? Because I don't have the answer.
I'm in a free world where I can do what
You know what I
want.
mean? And it's okay. And yet when you speak to someone from a different school of thought, one of my mentors actually said to me, I like that you're only going to start a family after 35, because then you understand yourself better. You understand how the world works a little bit better. You're more self-actualized. But then another question that I can ask you is that, does self-actualization sort of directly contradict traditionalism and culturalism then? You know?
Yeah, and that is like a very important question that you're putting out there, because I'm sorry, I'm gonna bring gender into this, and even fashion if I need to, because you find the chat, and this is very popular on social media. They're like, oh, look at our parents' marriages are lasting. Our youth have 80% divorce rate, or oh my God, back in the day, no one would be seen wearing this. So I think, to an extent, we can say the modern day brought a new way of living that is fair. There's something about tradition, and I'm sorry if I'm stepping on toes. There's something about tradition and culture. It has this gender inequality that from time to time I feel like we shy away from. You know what I mean? And at first we saw it, but you were just like, I don't understand why my brother is being praised for having a kid.
It was
outside of marriage.
normalized.
You know what I mean? So can we say props to the Cosmopolitan World?
I think big props, eh? Big props. Like, we've had to fight hard for what we have today. It's not much, but it's something. I mean, look at Oprah and Stedman, for instance. They're doing something that's in the black community, sorry to put it that way, is weird, because it's like, why bangashadi ones? Why don't they make children? Why don't they do things the normal way? We're not saying it that way, but in actual sense, but we're just like, we'll tiptoe and dance around it. But in actual fact, what we are trying to say is, why don't people do things the normal way? And I mean, who informs what normal is? Is there a handbook on normalcy somewhere? Is there like a blueprint?
Like
Who,
some form of guide.
you see what I mean? Who holds that blueprint? How do we get a copy?
5, 4, 3, 2.
No, so the thing is, we've normalized a lot of things. I'm going to go to a very dark example, but I think it's quite fitting in terms of cultural norms and societal unwritten rules. We've normalized gender-based abuse to the point that if someone talks about the fact that they're deeply traumatized from coming from that background, you're like, why? You know what I mean? But what do we mean why? How is that normal? You mentioned earlier that men have privileges and sort of freedoms that women don't.
And tradition and able.
Yes, and to some extent we keep perpetuating that, because then it transmits from one offspring to another offspring to generation and generation. So what we did is exactly what I said in the beginning. We sort of absorbed our ancestors' experiences, and we decided, okay, because this is how it was, this is how it should be, and this is how it will continue to be. But then imagine if more of us stood up and sort of exercised cultural independence.
Well, here's to us and our independence in the cosmopolitan world. Thando, thank you so much for creating time to come here, be with me, and unpack it all. And that is it. The chat you need to take away from this is that tradition, to an extent, is a bit of a stumbling block. Why? Because there's nothing new to learn there. You continue what your forefathers did, what your grandmothers and grandparents did, where else the cosmopolitan world says, do what you think is best for you. Self-actualize, position yourself, start your own custom, whatever is going to make you feel okay. This was episode 6 of The Hive Buzz. From me, Velamina Simono. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming.